Hi friends, Rabbi Julia Andelman here. Welcome to our last holiday webinar of this academic and Jewish year for Shavuot. It's great to have you with us, and probably not so many who are joining us for the first time, but if it's your first time, special welcome to you. Our really compelling topic today is disciplining desire, the meaning of the 10th commandment, with our colleague and teacher, Rabbi Eliezer Diamond. I want to just highlight a few upcoming programs for you, as I typically do before we start our webinars. Since we have so much going on for rabbis, the upcoming program that I'm really excited about, and I hope that you'll think about joining us, is our Summer Rabbinic Learning Conference, which is July 22nd to the 24th this year. Our theme is expanding the Jewish canon, expanding your rabbinic repertoire. So I want to tell you what this is about. The concept here is to really transform the textual heritage that we draw upon as rabbis when we speak and when we teach, to incorporate voices that have been marginalized historically, including women's voices, queer and trans Jews, Jews of color, disabled, and other voices as well. So the JTS faculty we're teaching the conference and other scholars that we're bringing in are going to be bringing new voices into that canon, and also really helping us look through totally new lenses at our traditional canon. And ultimately, this is about building more inclusive communities by teaching a broader and more inclusive canon. So the faculty lineup is excellent. I'm really excited about it, and I hope that you'll join us, and we're really pleased to be partnering with the RA in that conference. We also have online for you a ton of Shavuot resources, written dreshot, video dreshot, nusach recordings, and more. Our newest turnkey course is now up on the website. It's called Beyond Dispute, Debates That Shape Jewish Life. This is an adult education course in a box at a very high level. It has everything you need to teach really fantastic historical and conceptual and theological and cultural debates that have shaped Jewish life over many centuries. And finally, we have coming up next week, Tuesday, June 4th, a webinar with Danny Nevins, a virtual minyan, communal prayer in the digital age. This is part of the International Seminar on Halachic Study that's sponsored by the Law Committee, and we're happy to be taking part in that. It's focused this year on Avram Reiser's tshuva, Wired to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, minyan via internet. So especially if you're teaching one of these programs in your community, I wanted to make sure you knew about our program next week. It might be a helpful resource for you as well. Okay, so back to today on this program. So we're pleased that the Rabbinical Assembly is partnering with us in this webinar series as well. We thank them for their collaboration. I want to acknowledge my colleagues in the room, Larry and Brian, our amazing new media staff, our colleague Tim Bernard, Director of Digital Learning, and also we have with us today Melissa Friedman, Director of Alumni Affairs at JTS, and we want to invite all the JTS alumni on the webinar to stick around for a couple minutes after the end of the program to hear a few words from Melissa. The webinar will last approximately an hour and 15 minutes. If you haven't already printed the source sheet, you can download it using the link above the video on your screen. Rabbi Diamond will answer specific questions throughout the webinar as needed. If there's a clarification question in order to be able to follow the webinar, feel free to send that in. But we also have reserved Q&A time at the end for general questions. You can submit questions in the chat window below the video box at any time. If you have a problem with the chat window, you can email me at rabbinicresources@jtsa.edu, rabbinicresources@jtsa.edu, with webinar question in the subject line. But the chat window is best. We will get to as many questions as we can. We may not have time for every question. All right, now it's my great pleasure to introduce Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Diamond, who is the Rabbi Judah Nadich Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS, known so well to many of us. He's the author of Holy Men and Hunger Artists, Fasting and Asceticism in Rabbinic Culture. I was just saying before we went on the air that I need more caffeine, so now you see why. He's contributed to several rabbinic works, including the chapter on Torah study in the observant life, and his recent scholarship includes editing Professor Louis Ginsburg's commentary on Yerushalmi Psachim, and as well as articles addressing environmental issues from the perspective of halakha and Jewish ethics. He is currently writing a book that we are all eagerly anticipating, combining personal and general reflections on the experiential and theological aspects of Jewish prayer. He's taught in many settings, Stern College, RRC, 92nd Street Y, many Ramah camps, many other places. He was ordained at YU, received his doctorate in Talmud here at JTS, and we're so lucky to have you here, and so grateful to you for teaching this webinar today.
Thank you for inviting me to do so. Just want to say that this book on prayer has been mentioned for a long time in my bio, and I can now say that I am really and truly and finally writing it. And I want to thank Rabbi Guy Austrian, who really has initiated this, the push to finish the book. Before we begin, I want to, some of us know that our colleague, Rabbi Lawrence Troster, passed away this past week after a long illness, and I'd like to dedicate today's Torah study to his memory. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Also want to mention, we are talking about the 10th commandment or prescriptive utterance, lo tachmod. Actually, just side note, sort of a fun fact, there are some commentaries who, since they don't consider I am the Lord your God, the first verse of the Aseret HaDibrot as a commandment, count lo tachmod as 2 commandments. Not our problem now, just mentioning it. I also want to mention that Tim will be posting references to 2 articles that can supplement what we are going to be talking about today. One is by Alexander Rofé, entitled The 10th Commandment in the Light of 4 Deuteronomic Laws. And in a couple of instances, I'll actually direct you to pages in that article. If you would like a PDF copy of that article, you can contact me. And also, the second article is something that I wrote for Cross Currents, titled The Way of Torah as Esquisses. So, lo tachmod. What does it mean? It's rather opaque. We generally translate it as you shall not covet. And one of my favorite remarks about this commandment is that we translate an opaque phrase by using an equally opaque word. What does coveting mean exactly? I'm choosing this partially because it merits study, precisely because its meaning is insufficiently clear. Also because it is what I consider an insufficiently appreciated commandment. I think it's one that has important implications for our personal lives in general, and specifically for the environmental crisis. So let's start with some exegetical questions, which first of which is, what does chimud mean in the context of the 10 Commandments? And specifically, is it referring to thoughts or impulses in and of themselves, or an action? And so we will come to that question. Second, if it is an action, what is that action? What is that forbidden action? And how do we separate it from the presumably forbidden result? And let's actually read the verses themselves and then come back to those questions. So on the first page, sources 1 and 2, lo tachmod, first in Exodus, lo tachmod beit riecha, lo tachmod eshet riecha, ve'avdo ve'amato v'sharo v'chamoro v'chol asher l're'echa. We have a number of items that one should not covet: your neighbor's house, neighbor's wife, servant, maidservant, ox, ass, and anything else that is your neighbor's. And then in Devarim, Deuteronomy, we have a variation on that verse: Lo tachmod eshet riacha v'lo tit'aveh beit riacha sadehu v'avdo v'amato shoro v'chamoro v'chol asher l'riacha. And of course, the most important variant here is the inclusion of the word tit'aveh, which is translated here as "you shall not crave." And presumably, there is a difference between tachmod and tit'aveh. Certainly the rabbis thought so, and we'll have to talk about what that difference might be. So again, one question is, an exegetical question is, what is chimud in the context of the Ten Commandments? What, if it is an action, how is it separable from the presumably forbidden result? In other words, if we say that the action is do not desire your neighbor's property and take unlawful possession of it, what does chimud add? The prohibition is the taking of the property, the theft itself. What does chimud add to that prohibition? Why does that need to be mentioned? And if we say that chimud is the thought or the impulse itself to conceive a desire to take that as that which is not mine, so A, how do I will myself not to desire? That is rather a daunting task. And B, related to that, is desire in and of itself a bad thing? If you look for a moment at source 13 on page 5, our rabbis say as follows: Rab, the son of Shmuel, said in the name of Shmuel, and God saw all that he had created, and behold, it was very good, tov ma'od. Ma'od refers to yetzer hara, the evil impulse. Come back to the evil part in a moment. But is the evil impulse called good? How can an evil impulse be a good thing? Rather, Scripture comes to teach us that if not for the evil impulse, a man would not marry, nor would he have children, and the world could not exist. Desire is basic to human life. And for example, very often someone who is depressed, one of the symptoms is a lack of desire, a lack of interest in doing anything. And the point that Midrash is making here is that desire is an important part of human experience. So clearly, whatever lo tachmod means, if it is forbidding thought or desire per se, it cannot be forbidding all desire. And actually that, I think, is clear from the verse itself, because the verse is talking about desiring things that are not ours. So that is if we think of thought, if we think of the prohibition as thought, these are questions that we can ask. So let me sharpen the definition of coveting or chimud before we come to the exegetical question of what it means. The minimalistic definition could be coveting in a way that, were I to act on that desire, would result in a forbidden act. Right? So conceiving a desire for that which is not mine, were I to act on it, would result in a forbidden act, in theft, let's say, or adultery. If it is an action, a maximalist interpretation, it is conceiving a desire strong enough that actually results in all unlawful act, possession of that which is not mine. And if you want to see more about this, you might want to look in Rofe's article on page 48, where there he discusses the view that it is thought rather than action. Okay, so now let's return to the exegetical question. Reading the Torah, reading the biblical text, would we say that chimud is action or involves action, or it is simply the prohibition is simply desire itself. So there are several arguments in favor of seeing it as action. One is what the rabbis would call davar halamed mi'inyano, looking at it contextually. All of the prohibitions that precede it involve actions, right? Do not murder, do not engage in adultery, and so on. And therefore, one could argue that, therefore, chimud also must involve some action. Also, there are verses that explicitly link chimud to action. If you look at source 3 on page 7, I'm sorry, not source 3. Look at page 4. Look at page 2 rather, source 4, and look at the second paragraph where Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvot, in the second paragraph, quotes the Mechilta, Midrash on Shemot. These are the words of Mechilta: "You shall not covet, lo tachmod." And just go back to the Hebrew and the first line of that paragraph. Yachol afilu chomed b'davar. Maybe it refers merely to craving. Talmud lomar, there is a verse that teaches us otherwise. Lo tachmod kesef v'zahav alehem v'lakachta lach. The prohibition that is mentioned there is do not covet their gold and silver of the idols and take it for yourself. So their chimud is connected with action. If you look at Rofei, page 47, he mentions a number of other verses. I'll just mention 3 of them. Micha, Perek Beit, Pasuk Beit. Mishlei, Perek Vav, Pasuk Beit. Yehoshua, Perek Zayin, Pasuk Chaf Aleph. In all of these verses, chimud is connected explicitly with action. So violation of chimud involves or culminates in action. Using rabbinic methodology, there is another reason, at least for the rabbis, to define chimud as having to involve action. And that is, let me just point out, let me just distinguish here that until now we've talked about an exegetical issue. In other words, as exegetes, as interpreters of the biblical text, how are we to understand the word chimud? To what does it refer? Simply to a craving, or a craving that results in an action? What we're looking at now is a halachic question, right? That is, for the purposes of defining the prohibition of chimud, how should we interpret it? And using the principle of yitura dekra, a superfluous verse, the rabbis say, since you have in Dvarim, Deuteronomy 5:18, lo titaveh, and you also have lo tachmod, then presumably these are separate prohibitions. They can't be the same thing. So if lo titaveh refers to a craving, then tachmod must refer to a craving that results in a forbidden act. If you look at page 2, sources 4 and 5, you see, looking at the beginning of Rambam's definition of lo ta'aseh, reish samach hey, 265, v'hamitzvah hareish samach hey hi, shehiziranu mehasim machshavotenu la'asot tachbula kedei liknot ma sheyesh lezulato me'achenu, right? It forbids focusing our thoughts on plotting to acquire something belonging to one of our neighbors. And then in the next commandment, mitzvah reish samach vav, hi shehiziranu, that's source 5, shehiziranu mehasim machshavotenu lachmod ma sheyesh la'achenu ulhitavot bo. Shezeh yeh mevi la'asot tachbula liknoto. So this prohibition is to focus our thoughts, which may cause us to plot, but the point here is the craving itself is a prohibition, and that may lead to the violation of the prohibition above, which is craving in a way that will result in a forbidden act. So either way, again, if we come back to a question that we asked earlier, let's try to understand better the thought or the craving or the impulse that is forbidden. Certainly lo titaveh is being defined as prohibiting a craving in and of itself. And if the lo tachmod, if we understand lo tachmod as a craving that results in a forbidden action, the question is, if it results in a forbidden action, then why should lo tachmod be mentioned as a separate prohibition? If it's going to result in a forbidden action, why isn't it sufficient to say there is a prohibition of stealing or murdering or whatever it may be? What does it mean to define it as a separate prohibition? So let's take the first question. What kind of thoughts or cravings are forbidden? And we go back to source number 4 on page 2, and we read carefully the first paragraph. Rambam says, Hizhiranu mehasim machshavotenu, focusing our thoughts, which is different, fundamentally different from having a thought. In the realm of meditation, we talk about having distracting thoughts. And it is recommended that if I'm meditating and I have a distracting thought, not to engage the thought. Simply to say, I'm meditating, I have a distracting thought, it's there, thank you for sharing, at some point it will go away. However, another possibility is to engage the thought, to take hold of that thought. And so what's being said here is, what is prohibited is not a thought passing through my mind that that's a beautiful shirt and I wish it were mine. But to hold that thought in my mind, I can't stop thinking about that shirt. I really would like to have that shirt. How could I acquire that shirt? Or someone's Maserati, whatever it may be, whatever your particular cravings are. How do I, to focus on those thoughts? That is the prohibition. And we'll come at the end of this to the consequences of this, not only for others, right, but for myself. Second of all, we can say about these obsessive thoughts that this obsessive thoughts or having obsessive thoughts are what we might call a gateway transgression. And this is expressed by the rabbis if you look on page 3, source number 10. Rabbi Judah says, one who violates lo tachmod violates 7 of the prohibitions that are listed in the 10 Commandments, or more accurately, may end up violating them. And what are they? Lo yiyeh lecha, you shall not have other gods before me. Lo tisa, you shall not swear falsely. Lo tirtzach, not murder. Lo tinaf, not commit adultery, not commit theft. Lo tignov, lo ta'anet, not to swear falsely. And put last, but actually at the beginning of this process, lo tachmod. In other words, what's being said here is, where do these sins begin? Where does theft begin? Where does murder begin? It begins with an impulse, with an obsession, with a desire to have something that is not mine, that I should perhaps note as a desire and leave aside. But it's the obsession and holding that thought and not letting go of it, as we sometimes say, renting its space in my mind, that is a problem. And interestingly, one could say, to borrow from Christian language, that coveting, desiring and coveting, lo titaveh and lo tachmod, are the original sins. Take a look at source number 9, Bereshit, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Vav. Vatera ha'isha, right? The serpent has told woman Chava, why don't you taste of the Eitz Hadat? Vatera ha'isha ki tov ha'etz l'ma'achal v'chi ta'avahu le'einayim v'nechmad ha'etz lahaskil v'tikach mipiryo v'tochal v'titein gam li'isha ima v'yochal. So what leads to the sin of eating from the Eitz Hadat? That the woman sees that the fruit is ta'ava, a delight, and that the tree was desirable, nechmad. In other words, to me there's no question that the Torah here is alluding to these prohibitions that are mentioned later on in the Torah. And the Torah is in fact telling us these sins, the sins of taking what is not there, what is not mine rather, don't come out of nowhere. And they begin with nurturing obsessions and desires that we really need to leave aside. Rambam, in his Hilchot Gezelah, Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Aleph, and it's interesting, by the way, apropos of what we've just said, it's interesting that the Rambam discusses Hilchot Chimud in the very first chapter of Hilchot Gezelah V'Avedah, which I think expresses the idea that I am talking about now. It is at the beginning of Gezelah V'Avedah because this is a fundamental cause of theft, the obsessive desire to have that which is not mine. And at the end of Halacha Aleph, Perek Aleph, Halacha Yud Aleph, he says, I think he concludes this discussion of Chimud, Tzei ulamad mima'aseh achav v'navot. If you want to see that indeed Chimud leads to sins, other concrete sins, read the story of Achav and Navot. And let's look at that story. It's source number 11 on page 4. I'm going to read it in English for the sake of time. The following events occurred sometime afterwards. Nabot, the Jezreelite HaYisraeli, owned a vineyard in Israel adjoining the palace of King Achav of Shomron. Achav said to Nabot, "Give me your vineyard so that I may have it as a vegetable garden, since it is right next to my palace. It would be very convenient for me to have this as my vegetable garden. I will give you a better vineyard in exchange, or if you prefer, I will pay you the price in money." But Nabot replied, "The Lord forbid, right, Chalilali, that I should give up to you what I have inherited from my fathers, Nachalat Avotai." So Achav went home dispirited and sullen because of the answer that Nabot, the Israeli, had given him. And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face, and he would not eat. Vayishkav al mitato, vayasev et panav, velo achal lachem. That is, basically, Achav begins to, or he acts as a 5-year-old. Right? Anyone who has children are familiar with this tactic. Analogy might be, I'm holding my breath until I get what I want. Right? And that's essentially what Achav is doing. And so what happens next? His wife Izebel came to him and asked him, "Why are you so dispirited that you won't eat?" So he told her, "I spoke to Nabot the Israeli and proposed to him, sell me your vineyard for money, or if you prefer, I'll give you another vineyard in exchange." But he answered, "I will not give my vineyard to you. Lo atein lecha et karmi." And then we have, I think the Tanakh is winking at us here. Vatomer elav Izebel ishto, ata taseh melucha Yisrael. Kum echol lechem v'itav libecha, ani atein lecha et kerem Nabot HaYisraeli. So basically, Izebel says to Achav, "Man up, you're the king. And to prove it, I'm going to do it for you. Mommy's going to take care of it." Right? So what does she do? She wrote letters in Achav's name and sealed them with his seal and sent the letter to the elders and nobles who lived in the same town with Naboth. In the letter she wrote as follows: proclaim a fast, seat Naboth at the front of the assembly, and seat 2 scoundrels opposite him, and let them testify against him. You have reviled God and the king, then take him out and stone him to death. And that's exactly what happens. So Rambam's point is, this is a story that starts with chimud, that starts with desire, and it ends in theft and murder. And there's something interesting in this story, which actually is developed in the Rambam as well, which is we can ask the following question: why was this necessary? Why did Izebel feel the need to have witnesses bear false witness against Naboth and have him convicted and killed? Achav is the king. Izebel is the queen. Take him out and kill him. Wouldn't be the first or the last time that king or queen might do that. And here I think we see something very interesting, that very often we rationalize an action that deep down we know is wrong, is sinful. And that is what I think is happening here. Rather than simply acting violently, Achav and Izebel feel the need to show that in some sense this is a legal possession of the property. Right? And of course the principle here is that if you are a criminal and you're executed, your property goes to the king. This is true in many cultures. So that seems to be the idea here. Think about in the Soviet Union and other similar regimes, how there were those who had confessions beaten out of them until they confessed. Why? Just take the guy out and shoot him. End of story. Right? So there's this need to salve my conscience and to be able to say, no, really, it's okay. What I did is okay because the laws were followed, protocol was followed, and we have convicted this person according to the laws. And I point this out because this is an important part of craving. Now, when we crave, it sometimes affects our thinking, and it affects our moral compass. And that, I think, is one way of understanding what's happening here. And interestingly, we see this in the Rambam as well. Take a look at, on page 2, source number 6. This is not an easy source to understand, and we're not going to try to unpack it all now. Maybe if we have time at the end, we'll come back to it simply as Torah Lishma. You can also, when you have time, look at source number 7 on page 3, where one of the commentaries of the Rambam tries to unpack it. But in any case, let's read it. Kol hachomed abdo o amato uveito v'kelav shel chaviro, o kol davar she'efshar lo sheikneu mimenu, v'chbid alav b'reim, v'hiftzir bo ad shelakacho mimenu, af al pi shenatan lo damim rabim, harei ze over b'lo ta'aseh, shene'emar lo tachmod. We'll stop there. I don't want to deal with the end because that's the rather difficult section. So Rambam says that if I covet someone else's maidservant, manservant, and so on, and I put pressure on that person, myself, and I had my friends put pressure on that individual until finally the person gives in, even though he paid an exorbitant amount for the object of his desire, he has violated the prohibition, lo tachmod. Now notice that there's a dramatic difference between the Rambam's definition of lo tachmod and the Torah's definition of lo tachmod. Right? For the Torah, prohibition of lo tachmod is coveting, desiring, scheming that results in a sinful act. Right? Forcibly taking that which is not mine. For the Rambam, it's more subtle. Even if I follow the normal legal procedures, I pay this person for the object, and he agrees to sell it to me. If that comes about because I put the kind of pressure on this person and in effect make this person an offer that he can't refuse, I can't justify, I can't rationalize my behavior by saying, well, look, he agreed to it. I need to know that when I do this kind of thing, that in itself is a sin. And I want to add here the thought that what we're talking about in a sense is not respecting boundaries. That's really what we're talking about. That an essential part of chimud is not respecting boundaries and not having a strong sense that each of us is entitled to what is ours. And once we begin desiring and seeking to have that which is not ours, and we do so in a way that we undermine the owner, we are violating, in a sense, a fundamental contract by which civilized society needs to operate. That is to know what is yours and what is mine, and unless there is good reason for you to offer it to me, and unless it's done in good faith and with full intent, I am blurring boundaries. Rofei mentions, he associates 4 prohibitions with lo tachmod. If you look at the article, you'll see he has linguistic reasons for doing so. But one of the prohibitions, which he sees as a concrete manifestation of lo tachmod, is lo tasig gevul reacha, not to move a boundary stone between your property and the owner's property. And this, I think, is a perfect illustration of 2 of the things that we've said. One is, in moving the boundary stone, I am creating a situation where now if we go to court, I will be able to say, well, look where the boundary stone is. So evidence suggests that it's mine. I didn't take something out of this person's hand. Look, it's mine. But literally in this case, I'm not respecting the boundary. I'm taking something to which I'm not entitled. Now, until now, we've talked about the implications of lo tachmod for others. Right? The fact that if I conceive of, hold onto a desire to the extent that it leads to my either unlawfully taking what is yours or putting pressure on you in a way that you act against your true desires and what you would like. Lo tachmod, or acting in this way, also has consequences for us, those of us who crave and desire. And if you look at source 14 on page 5, a Mishnah that we all know, the Mishnah says, who is wealthy? One who rejoices in his lot, as Scripture says. You shall enjoy the fruits of your labors, you shall be happy and you shall prosper. Right? And I say in the note, Ben Zoma is translating this verse as, if you find joy in the fruit of your labors, then you shall be happy and you shall prosper. Ashrecha ba'olam hazeh, you will be happy in this world. V'tov lecha lo'olam haba, you'll prosper in the next. Now let's go back to this idea of ezehu ashir hasameach bechelko. What does it mean to be sameach bechelko? I think too often people understand it as, okay, I'll settle, I'll accept it. That's what I got. I understand I can't have everything, so okay. I think the key word here is hasameach. If you think about the way that word is used elsewhere in Tanakh, think of v'samachta b'chagecha, you shall rejoice in your holidays. To be sameach bechelko means that I truly rejoice in what is mine. I truly appreciate what is mine, which is different from settling. I personally began a couple of years ago to keep a gratitude journal. And I recommend it. I invite you to do that. It's an incredibly powerful exercise. Because so many times we go through a day, A, not appreciating what we have received during that day, and B, some part of our mind thinking, if only I had some, fill in the blank, if only something else had happened. And this Mishnah is saying, when you're doing that, or I don't know if the Mishnah is saying this, but I would add to it, that when you're doing that, you actually are not present in a fundamental way in your own life. You are not taking full joy and pleasure out of what, in fact, you do have. There's a teaching that many of us know. This is source number 15 on page 6. Amar Rabbi Yudan b'shem Rabbi Aibo, ein adam yotzei min ha'olam v'chatzi ta'avato biyado. Ella in itle ma'a bai lemebad yaton tartein mavan. V'in itle tartein mavan bai lemebad yaton arba'a mea. Rabbi Yudan said, in the name of Rabbi Aibo, one does not leave this world possessing even half of what one desires. Rather, if one has 100, one wishes to turn them into 200. If he has 200, he wishes to turn them into 400. So here we have it. Right? I have 200. I could rejoice in that and be grateful. And what's going through my mind? 200 is great. But you know what would be really great? 400. And so how can I possibly find satisfaction and joy in what I have? This reminds me, of one of my favorite jokes. As my father always says, or actually we attribute this to him because this is his style, if you've heard it before, don't stop me. So the joke is as follows. A grandfather is walking with his grandson on the beach. And all of a sudden, a large wave comes in, and the grandson is washed out to sea. And so the grandfather turns heavenward and says, God, how could you possibly do this? And lo and behold, another wave washes in, washes out, and there is the grandson, safe and sound on the shore. And the grandfather looks heavenward and says, he had a hat, right? So, right, I mean, this sums up an attitude that, look, I will be the first to confess that I am sometimes guilty of that, which is one of the reasons I need to keep a gratitude journal. But this is the danger of a certain kind of craving and desiring, that among other things, it actually takes us away from our life. Sometimes people say things that are so simple, but for whatever reason they strike us. And I read somewhere once, if you're here, you can't be there, which is obvious, but maybe not so obvious. In other words, sometimes we live as not being here and not being there. And because I don't really appreciate what I have, so part of me is somewhere else. But the truth is, I can't actually be in that other place because I don't have that life, whatever the life may be, sort of a Walter Mitty, kind of existence, except it doesn't actually happen. So I want to say one more thing about, well, actually, before I get to the environmental piece of my remarks, I do want to make sure that we understand that, going back to a remark I made at the beginning, desire is an important part of who we are as human beings. And we need to know that sometimes desire is either just a part of life, not dangerous as it were, or actually positive. The Midrash says, you don't have this in front of you, but if you look at the Mechilta de Rashbi, the Mechilta Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Midrash in commenting on Perek Chaf, Pasuk Yudalet of Shemot, says, Yachol, what if a person says, Valvai eini ke'eno, Valvai sa'ari ke'sa'aro, certainly works for me as a person who doesn't have too much hair at the moment. You know, I look at someone and say, wow, what a wonderful head of hair. It'd be great if I could have that head of hair. Well, I don't. And that's a natural thought. Well, I see something. I know I can't have it. I admire it. That, the Midrash is saying, is not a violation of lo tachmod. It's natural for people to have that experience. We're not expect to shut our eyes and not have any thoughts of what others have, and to say, you know, that's really nice. Be nice if I had it, but ain't going to happen. And sometimes desire is very important. And I will, before I quote this, I will acknowledge that there is something very gendered and culturally determined about this remark in the Mechilta Perek Chet Pasuk Yudalid. Yachol lo yitaveh al bat litla. Maybe lo tachmod includes not looking at a woman or a man and saying, you know, I'd really like to marry that person, and the person is not that anxious to marry me. Does that constitute chimud? The Midrash says no. I mean, of course, here we need to look at the situation, but we know that the way courtships sometimes work, you hear this story all the time, is a man meets a woman or a woman meets a man, the person said, not interested, and the other party is persistent, and they end up being married. Obviously, if someone kidnaps the other party, that is chimud and beyond chimud. But it is in the nature, it is in human nature, and it is the nature of the world in which we live, that sometimes we have to push for things that really are important to us, and at a certain point, convince the other person in a way that is not pressuring the person to do something that we know that person really does not want to do, to marry us or whatever it may be. So let's come finally to the environmental piece. Let me just, yeah. So think about chimud as taking something, taking possession of something that is not mine. Now let's think about the present environmental crisis. We often blame it on corporations, large companies, big oil, whatever it is. And of course, all of those entities are not without blame. We also have to look inward. Right? Capitalism is based on supply and demand. If we, as consumers, did not demand more and more from the suppliers, there would be less and less degradation of our environment. And if we think about what we do as consumers in the light of the original biblical verse, which forbids us to crave and to desire in a way that leads us to take hold of, to possess that which is not rightfully ours, isn't that in a sense exactly what we do? The world is God's. The world belongs to all of humanity. If I demand and desire and then eventually acquire that which in some important sense is not mine, it is not mine to pollute the air that belongs to all of us. It's not mine to take resources that really belong to all of us. I would argue that that really is a form of lo tachmod. And again, I think it begins with an act of desire that is the opposite of sameach bechelko. That our inability or unwillingness to see if we can be happy with and really rejoice in that which we already have. And let's look at, apropos of that, let's look at a passage on page 6. Tanu Rabbanan, this is the last source. Tanu Rabbanan, Ma'aseh be'adam echad, shaya misakel merishuto lirishut harabim. There was a person who wanted to clear his field of stones, something that I once did for a new moshav in Israel, not something you want to do. And mutza'o chasid echad, and a pious man saw him and said, Reika, mipnei ma ata misakel mirshut she'ina shelcha lirishut shelcha. And interestingly, he doesn't call him an evil person. He calls him a foolish person, in effect. You're not thinking. Why? Because you're taking stones from that land which is not yours and casting them into property that is yours. So, not surprisingly, liglei galav, the man sneers at him. Liamim, after many days, nitzrach limkor sadehu. The man ended up having to sell his field. Vayam mahalech boto reshut harabim, v'nichshal botan avanim. So now he's walking in the public domain, and guess what? He's tripping over the very stones that he threw into the public domain. Amar, so at this point he says to himself, Yafeh amar li oto chazid. That guy was right. The pious man was right. Mipnei ma, when he said, Mipnei ma atam misakel mirshut she'ina shelcha lirishut shelcha. Why do you remove stones from land that is not yours and cast them into property that is yours? So how do we understand this, the idea? In other words, we have two paradigms here. So let's understand what the two paradigms are. The first is that what is mine is absolutely mine. And that which is outside of what I consider mine is not my problem. It doesn't belong to anyone. I can do with it as I will. Okay. The Chassid presents a different paradigm. Know that that which we call our own is not absolutely our own. It is a gift that we receive from God. It is a gift that we have for the time that we have it, and then we don't, either because we pass from the world or that object or field or whatever it is passes from our possession. But the point is, even if it doesn't, we need to know that in a fundamental way we are stewards of that property. We are not absolute owners of it. And if we look at the public domain, it's not true that it belongs to no one. It belongs to everyone. And I think in saying that it belongs to you, the public domain belongs to you, what the Chassid is really saying is, it belongs to you because you are part of humanity. And so everything that is outside of the property that I own and I see as mine really belongs to all of us. And so when I abuse, when I engage of depredation of what belongs to all of us, I am violating lo tachmod. I am desiring, I am coveting that to which I am not entitled, and I am taking it for myself, and I'm doing it at the expense of my fellow human beings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there's so much that you just said. We could go in a lot of directions.
Okay.
I want to pick up on, first of all, now is your time to send in your questions. So submit via the chat window or again via email at rabbinicresources@jtsa.edu. I wanted to pick up on one particular thing that you said about the idea that the desiring and perhaps acting on the desire of something that belongs to someone else's violates a fundamental contract on which civil society is based, something like that. That's what you said, that we're each entitled to what's ours. What I'm thinking about is the fact that there are systemic injustices that lead some people to have much more than they're entitled to and other people to have less than they're entitled to. Maybe not legally, but sort of in terms of justice, I think. There's sort of injustice built into the socioeconomic system. And then there are also situations where someone, an individual has actually been, deprived unjustly of something that's theirs through theft or in some other way. So I'm just wondering, do these sources allow for that, or do they assume that everyone has what they need, and that there aren't injustices that there really are happening, and that shouldn't evoke legitimate emotional responses that do deserve space?
Right. So that's an excellent question. And if we look at some of the medieval sources, Ibn Ezra's comment on this prohibition, he asked the question, how can you not desire? How can you not crave? And he uses a parable, and he says, what if I am a peasant and I see the princess? Right? I know that I will never marry the princess. There would be no sense in entertaining that thought. So he says, similarly, people need to know that we all receive what God intends us to receive. And that's what we might call a very quietistic way of thinking about things, and I would say culturally determined. Right? In the medieval world, I think that's how people saw things. Each of us is assigned a role. This is what you're entitled to. To me, in the modern world, I would say that back then too, but certainly today, at the risk of going midrashic, and even I think I'm maybe going to dip into politics a little bit, okay, be that as it may, I think we can say today, apropos of what you're saying, that in fact, people have to consider whether, as a result of their craving and their desires, justice, a just way of thinking about a just society, right, envisioning a just society, would make me conclude that I am not entitled to the wealth that I am claiming for myself or taking for myself. Here's where I'm going to say something risky, but even if you don't agree with me on the politics, roll with it and think of an example that works for you. Let's think of the tax cut, recent tax cut. And let's say that the idea, what was envisioned was that as a result of the tax cut, more money would be invested in development, in jobs, and so on. And yet, a lot of the money, I don't know the percentages, was used for stock buybacks. I think one could argue that that's an instance of chimud, that's an instance where a socially conscientious person would say, what is the point of this tax cut? And what would be fair and just? To use the wealth that I've now received for the betterment of the world as a whole, for this nation as a whole. And yet, some people concluded, hey, I've got more money, why not buy more stocks? I have X number of stocks, I want more. I want X plus. We can disagree on whether in certain cases we should apply this principle or not. But I think the principle is relevant. And indeed, I agree with you. And I just want to say methodologically, I think this is a very important part of how we think halachically and how we live halachically. There's always a risk, I will acknowledge, going beyond the black letter law, what's on the books. But I would say, on the other hand, v'lo ata ben chorin lihi batel mimenu. We can't say, well, that's what's on the books. We can't go beyond that, right? Halacha is, to use a Buddhist expression, or I think Zen expressions in Buddhist, an arrow pointing. It's not just telling us, do this or don't do that. It's supposed to stimulate our thought and to say, so therefore, in these other realms, what is the significance of that halacha? And whether you agree with me or not, you have to ask the question. I believe that we as Jews and as halachic Jews are obligated to ask the question.
So you're redirecting me a little bit to if I want to think about this in terms of societal injustices, worry less about the deprived one and think about the application of this chimud to those focused on getting more and more. That's where the chimud that we need to worry about is happening.
So I would say that here's how I would construct it. I think those are not mutually exclusive. Clearly, throughout the Torah, we are obligated to help the poor and the needy. But I think what is so important about studying chimud and understanding it is that it helps us understand what gets in the way, one of the things that gets in the way of actually doing that. And one of the things that gets in the way of doing that is that we allow ourselves to be hijacked, if you will, by our cravings and our desires, A, and B, to go back to something that I said earlier, and we rationalize those cravings and those desires. Hey, it's my money. I earned it, so I'm entitled to keep it. So I think both are true. And I think what's really important here is that very often we can say that something is right and we should do it. But just as important, if not more important, is to understand why we're not doing it, right? And that's something that I'll say about myself. I could benefit from spending more time, thinking about that. I think we could frame it in psychological terms, but I think what it's being framed here actually partially in psychological terms, right? But also in ethical terms.
I think what we're talking about is connected to two comments/questions, or a few actually. I'm just gonna share 3 comments and questions at once because they're all related. Okay, so Ted Lichtenfeld asks it like this: if you're a powerful and ambitious person, is there any way that you could live without violating this lo ta'aseh? Baruch Zailakovich is noting that in our current society, our current culture, who is content with their portion? The wealthy. And how do we turn that around? The way I'm reading that is, how do we cultivate a culture where of being sameach b'chilko that's not sort of constantly, the only people we see as having enough are those with tremendous means. And then the last comment I'll share here is from Nellie Altenberger. The Chassid story explains why we have in Pirkei Avot the idea that what's mine is considered midat Sodom. All right, those are 3 comments and questions for your comment.
So, not only is my long-term memory not so great, neither my short-term. So just remind me briefly, Ted Lichtenfeld's question.
If you're a powerful and ambitious person, is there any way that you can never violate this mitzvah?
So here's a thought experiment. Compare Achav in the story that we read with the description in Devarim of how a king should conduct oneself. The description in Devarim is, as a king, I should have a Sefer Torah with me at all times. The message being, what it means to be the king is not, as Mel Brooks said, it's good to be the king. I can take whatever I want. What it means is to be a servant, to serve the people. Yes, I have power, but to quote another popular cultural reference, with great power comes great responsibility. And the responsibility is embodied in the Torah. I mean, it's a physical manifestation of a spiritual, ethical, and we would say halachic obligation that the king has. So how can I be powerful and not violate lo tachmod? Might be difficult, but it's possible. If I think of myself as being more responsible precisely because I have more. With regard to the second comment, I wish I remembered the name of the book and the name of the author. It appeared in one of my Bibles, The New Yorker. Whatever. Basically, the thesis of the author is, if you think about how we frame, part of how we frame things in our society is it's a society in which everyone has the opportunity to rise. If you think about that, that's a value judgment, right? So if I'm an auto worker, I have the opportunity to become, or my children will have the opportunity to become whatever, doctors or lawyers. Now, nothing wrong with that happening, and obviously there are financial consequences to being one or the other, or maybe. But do we affirm, and do we value, and do we let people who are auto workers, or carpenters, or custodians, that their work is important? Not that I'm saying to those people, this is you, just, that's it. And then but really to say to those people, your work is valued. You may have aspirations to do more, and that's fine, but in this moment, doing what you're doing, you are a person of value, and what you're doing has value. I remember I once had to get somewhere in a cab, and time was very tight. And the cab driver took me this way and that way, and got me there on time. Something that was a very unlikely outcome. And I said to him, you're an excellent cab driver, right? I might aspire to be a cab driver, or probably not, but I needed to acknowledge that this person was good at what he did. And so without insisting that people remain where they are, we really have to think about what we say to people and what we value, and how we value and what we say to people. I think that's an important part of the answer. And as regarding the third comment, there's an article by Rav Aaron Lichtenstein where he says more or less what Nellie said. He says, how can it be that the Mishnah says, Shali, Shali, Shalach, Shalach is mitat stone, right? The Mishnah presents two possibilities. One is yours, mine is mine. That's normal for people. What does it mean to say that it's mitat stone, to act as the people of Sodom? And Rav Lichtenstein says, if you envision the world as a world in which what is mine is totally separate from what is yours, I have no sense that actually what I have, A, is due to others and not just to me, and B, that being true, the corollary is, therefore, I should use what I have to help others, then I am truly ungrateful and uncaring about others. I once said when we bought our first house, if this was a synagogue, we'd have plaques. These rooms donated by my mother-in-law, who provided us with a loan, to help buy the house. This couch donated by my aunt. Right? My house, our house. Well, first of all, of course, the bank's house in a very fundamental way. But leaving that aside, and you could say that also, right? If there weren't banks, if there weren't mortgages, what would I do? Anyway.
This is not directly related to what you were just saying, but if it's okay with you, I just want to share something I heard. I went to a dinner party over Memorial Day weekend, and I met a filmmaker who's working on a film about people's dreams about Donald Trump, which apparently is a really widespread phenomenon, that lots of people are having dreams about Donald Trump. I'm sharing this because it could fit in sermonically with this material. So it turns out that a lot of the dreams, like a huge number of the dreams, and this is irrespective of people's political persuasions and sort of conscious reactions, positive or negative, to Trump, a lot of people are dreaming that some long-lost family connection is discovered, and it turns out that they're related to Trump, and they can come into his circle and benefit from his largesse and everything that he has. To me, this seems totally related, right? That I don't know if it seems. Does it seem related to you?
Not yet.
That the way Right? There are a lot of different ways we can respond to Trump, but that it's like apparently a high percentage of people, the way they're responding, it sort of connects to what Baruch was saying, is I want to be like that. I want to be connected to that. I want to be identified with that because that's this life of bounty that I want to be part of.
Yes, and it is known, again, at the risk of dipping into politics, that one of the ways in which some of us respond to those who are wealthy and sort of push a politics that favors the wealthy is to say, one of the reasons I support it is because I believe I can become that person. I want to be that person. And maybe you will be. But in focusing on that, you really, once again, you're moving away from the value of your own life and the value of what you are doing. I always like to say about my children that they're successful. Now, in my experience, usually when someone says my child is successful, it means one of two things or both. They're making a lot of money, or they have a prestigious job. You know, let's say they're a surgeon. Good money? Oh, surgeon. I consider all my children successful. And the reason I consider them successful is that each and every one of them is a mensch. That's success. And to me, I hope that they, like I do, are sameach bechelkam. I rejoice in the fact that they are those kinds of people. Do I want them to have financial security? Absolutely. If they make more money, okay. But that's not at the center of what is important in life. And I think that is a larger message of lo tachmod. Again, there are two aspects. There's the interpersonal aspect of lo tachmod and the internal, intrapersonal aspect of lo tachmod. The interpersonal is, am I doing right by others? Am I respecting who they are and what rightfully should be theirs? And the intrapersonal part is, am I valuing what I have and am I fully rejoicing in it? Both are important.
Thank you so much. This is making me think we should do a series with you, one webinar on every commandment. And you can let us know in your evaluations, just the 10.
Just 10, okay.
If you're interested in that. But on the subject of the evaluations, there's a very brief evaluation right there on your screen. So please do fill that out. We really read them and pay attention to them. Thank you so much to Rabbi Diamond. Thank you to everyone for joining. And don't forget, JTS alumni, we would love for you to stick around for another 2 minutes to hear a couple words from Melissa Friedman, our Director of Alumni Affairs. Chag Sameach. We will see you, I'll see you at our next webinar in the fall.
Thank you, Rabbi Andelman and Rabbi Dr. Diamond. I'm Melissa Friedman. I'm the Director of Alumni Affairs, and thank you for staying on a couple of extra minutes so we can connect with one another. I just want to first begin by welcoming your newest colleagues who were ordained last week at the 125th commencement. So mazel tov and welcome to our esteemed alumni community. And I also just want to take this time that this time of the year in Alumni Affairs is a time of high transition. People secure new positions, they relocate, all sorts of new things happen in the end of the spring. And I encourage you to please stay in touch. You can contact me through alumni@jtsa.edu. You can go to the website. We have a form so you can fill out your new contact information, your new jobs. Share with me your exciting news. If you have information about your colleagues, please do share that with me also. There's so much exciting stuff going on at JTS, and come the fall, when we have our big opening and welcoming to our new campus, we want to be sure to include you and invite you. Knowing where you are makes that possible. So thank you, and I hope also that I'll be able to contact you with the hopes of finding some of your classmates who we may have lost touch with by accident over the years. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Omer Challenge that is going on right now. And encourage you to please join us and participate and partner with JTS as we try to raise, and we are on task to raise over $49,000 during the 49 days that we count the Omer. You can visit the website, support.jtsa.edu/Pesach 2019. partnering with you makes it possible for us to continue to train visionary leaders like those who were ordained last week and the other students from the other 5 schools. So thank you so much. Thank you.